Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're assessing the risk of the Zika virus outbreak that's hit the Americas and has spread. With us, Dr. Yazdan Pana, head of infectious diseases at Paris's Bichat Hospital. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Jonathan Ball, professor of virology at the University of Nottingham, is with us. So is Dr. Judy Stone. She is a contributor to Forbes magazine. And from Radio France International's Brazilian language service, Cynthia Cardoso. We were talking just before the break how public health officials have been slow to react when it comes to the perils of climate change. One of them is, of course, the spread of areas where tropical diseases are felt. Another question then is about mosquitoes, and we talked about it at the outset, and there you can see how you contain the mosquitoes that carry the disease. We talked about Brazilian troops being deployed. These are images in the northeastern state of Maranhão. What's your reaction, Cynthia Cardoso, when you see those machines being deployed?
It reminds me of my childhood because it's not the first time I see an outbreak caused by mosquitoes. During the 60s and the 70s, I guess, Brazil had eradicated almost this mosquito. And then on the mid-80s, we had again the first big outbreak of dengue fever. And then I remember in my neighborhood, they spread all over Rio, the trucks just like that, spraying
O governo do estado está
pesticides in order to try to control the mosquitoes. But the truth is that for the past 30 years, we've been having on again, off again outbreaks of dengue fever. And unfortunately, those images are nothing new for us because it's been a strong battle.
So why were they almost eradicated and then they came back?
It's very complicated. I mean, the cities also are very big now. Cities like Rio and São Paulo, they doubled the size over the past decades. And also the problem for the dengue and the mosquitoes, of course, I'm not a specialist, but for what I heard and what I lived in Brazil is that we have this standing water. So during summer, Brazil is very rainy in Rio, so we have standing water everywhere, not only pools, but really nearly everywhere. So like this is very difficult to focus and to really battle against the mosquitoes. They try to prevent a population that they have to do their job as well, not having standing water, so that the population must engage themselves in this battle against the mosquitoes. But unfortunately, it's being very hard.
All right, Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff has called for the population to be the eyes and ears for fighting the Zika virus epidemic.
We must all make an effort. The Ministry of Health is making an effort together with all the big Brazilian and international pharmaceutical labs for us to have a vaccine, not only against dengue virus, but also against the Zika virus. We must also give our full support to the treatment of children who are the victims of microcephaly and to their families.
Jonathan Ball, you heard Brazil's president there talking about the need for an alliance with the big pharmaceutical companies. Is that how diseases like the Zika virus are going to be stopped with a vaccine?
Yes, it sounds very familiar territory. So if we think back to the discussions that we had before with Ebola and these alliances with the big pharma companies, I think the reality is that we may be able to develop a vaccine against Zika virus. It would be very difficult then to work out exactly how that vaccine would be deployed, when it would be deployed, which populations would be deploying it, how affordable. So all of the things that we discuss when we talk about these sorts of interventions come to play. And of course, the other bigger picture, which you alluded to before, was this is one of many viral threats or infectious disease threats. And we can't predict what the next threat will be. So we've heard how SARS coronavirus emerged in Asia, MERS coronavirus in the Arabian Peninsula. We had Ebola in Africa. We've now got a Zika virus outbreak in South America and Central America. That's followed on after dengue and chikungunya. The list is endless. And therefore, is it really feasible for us to be able to develop a vaccine for each and every threat? Sure, we can develop a vaccine for the top threats, for the ones that we think are most likely, but it's a really difficult game to play. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do globally is develop initially in good health care infrastructures and surveillance systems, because that's exactly what flags to us that there's a problem in the making and developing, and then we're able to have a variety of interventions to try and bring these things under control. So vaccines isn't the panacea. It's part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution.
Judy Stone, do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There are two things I wanted to add. One is in terms of the widespread spraying that's going on in Latin America, one of the problems is that resistance to pesticides has emerged as a big problem, and that's going to inhibit the success of the pesticides. I would also worry about spraying pesticides around pregnant women. The other technique that I think needs more emphasis is instead of sending out armies to fumigate areas, is sending them out and employing the citizens to get rid of any standing water, both out of doors and inside people's homes. And that would be hugely important in reducing the mosquito population against all of these viral infections.
Cynthia Cardoso, would that be a better solution? How does it work in a place like Rio with huge slums?
Yeah, that's very difficult. Now we see the images of the soldiers. They have to go door to door, so it's virtually impossible to visit every place, every home. So, of course, the population must engage. And the authorities in Rio, they also promised that they're going to visit all the Olympic venues on a daily basis to prevent any breeding sites, any standing water. But of course, you have to have the population to do it, because it's virtually really impossible to go to every home in a city like Rio and the conditions that we know, the shanty towns and so on.
I mean, I must confess, all right, when I see, I wouldn't want my street to be sprayed, but is that irrational of me, Dr. Yazdanpana?
To be sprayed?
I mean, I remember in West Africa seeing airplanes flying over the city spraying, and
Yeah.
I don't know, it made me a little nervous.
No, I think that one point that was made that is very important, I think, is the education of the population. I think we cannot, of course, we should spray pesticides. That we cannot avoid that. But I think, as it was said, the population is wise. The population is intelligent. I think we should not underestimate that. We should educate population, because there's standing waters. That's why we have mosquitoes. And to educate them how to get rid of this, it's very important. And I think maybe it's more important than sending armies to do that.
You say the pesticides are inevitable, but I mean, my recollection of West Africa is that citronella oil was just as effective and probably a lot better for you than DEET, for instance.
No, I agree, because as it was said, there are resistance, they can be toxic, but there are some pesticides that we can use that could be efficacious, although we should evaluate over time whether they are resistant or not.
All right, reactions coming in, and again, there's a bit of, how should we say, people are nervous on Twitter here. Zika is going to be a generation-defining outbreak. U.S. local governments need to start controlling mosquitoes now. Jonathan Ball, would you say the same thing was said when 24 months ago we were talking about Ebola?
Well, obviously, excuse me, Ebola and Zika are spread in very different ways, but it's true that governments do need to have some kind of plan on how to deal with it. We have discussed the means and the methods that will help bring this outbreak under control, and it's very varied. It's the same sorts of things that we discussed before. It's about education. It's about healthy living environments. So there's a lot of poverty in many cities. It's very difficult to control things like freestanding water, because these people have got lots of other things to be worrying about. So it's a complex problem. And governments have a role to play in that, people have a role to play in that, and scientists indeed have a role to play to try and understand what the virus is doing, how it's behaving, whether or not its behaviour has changed. And then ultimately we have to think about the way that we live. You know, you've touched on it earlier on in the programme, things like globalisation have a huge role in the spread of these viruses. The reason that dengue virus got to the Americas was in shipments of used tyres. They contained stagnant water. That water was shipped all the way from Southeast Asia to America, and the Aedes mosquito hatched. With it came dengue. So it's a very complex situation.
Do you agree in part one of our discussion, Dr. Bald? We heard Judy Stone mention how these genetically modified mosquitoes can be effective. Do you agree?
It's a really exciting area of research. So it's an area also that's been investigated for the control of malaria. Now, we know how difficult it's been to eradicate malaria from Africa using the sorts of techniques that we've been talking about, for example, insecticide spraying, etc. These beasts evolve very quickly. They're very resilient. Insects are very resilient. And so it's really difficult to contemplate eradication of an insect like a mosquito, but certainly you can reduce numbers quite significantly, and there are a number of genetic interventions. There's a number of ways of changing the genetic makeup of mosquitoes to try and eradicate a range of diseases. So it's really exciting.
Now, how does it work? Tell us. How does it work? These GM mosquitoes.
Well, there are different. Yeah, there are different ways. So for example, with one set, you essentially make them sterile so that you reduce population numbers because they can't breed. There are other mosquitoes where you genetically clone into them some antiviral antibodies, basically. So they produce antibodies which kill the virus, and therefore they kill it inside the mosquito, because we know that all of these viruses and many of these parasites actually replicate inside of the mosquito, so that you cut off the life cycle in the mosquito. So it's exciting, but we don't know whether they'll work or not.
All right. We heard the head of Transmissible Diseases Department at Brazil's Health Ministry saying for now there's no possibility of proposing any of these new technologies, including that of the genetically modified mosquito, as a big control measure nationwide. Judy Stone, is that the case?
Well, it's being trialed in some parts of Brazil, and in fact have shown about a 90% efficacy in reducing mosquito populations there. So I'm not sure what the rate-limiting step is in terms of ramping up the distribution. I think that that's a smarter approach to go than focusing on vaccines, which would take years and also be very, very costly.
Is there reason for, again, we're not scientists. I'd be ashamed if I showed you my report card from science class from high school. So should I be nervous? Because we have reason about GM foods, modifying seeds genetically, how it has its downsides. What could be the potential downside of genetically modified mosquitoes?
All that this is doing is making mosquitoes that can't breed. And so it's not going to release some sort of super monster into the community. It's far safer, in my opinion, than the pesticides that are being sprayed. As I say, it's not breeding, it's not creating a new species, it is preventing the mosquitoes from breeding and cutting down the population that way. So it seems an extraordinarily safe approach to do. And they're looking at that specifically in South America and in the Florida Keys where it's being trialed.
Of course, cutting down the population, but how much do you cut it down without impacting the food chain?
I asked about that, actually. I asked Cameron Webb, who's a mosquito expert in Australia, and some experts in the South here, and they think that it's not an issue in terms of environmental impact in the food chain, unlike the spraying that was done, for example, in southern Florida that decimated the mosquitoes and cut the bird population down. There are enough other mosquitoes that are not going to transmit these infections that will fill in the food chain.
Yazdan Pana, because of course we're talking about one specific variety.
No, I really think that this is a very important research area, but I think it's a very important research area. I'm not sure that with what we know right now, we can start doing it. We should definitely do it, but we should do it in studies, in researchers.
I sense caution. Why are you cautious about this?
Because what you said, actually, what you mentioned, we don't know everything about changing these mosquitoes, and I think we should be cautious. It's very important. There have been publication in very important scientific journals showing the benefit of that, but I think it has not been at large levels done, so we should be cautious.
We've said several times during the discussion that we've moved on from one global health crisis to another, bird flu, Ebola, and now this. Have the World Health Organization and the public health systems in Europe and in the United States, elsewhere, have they properly assessed what they did right and wrong for the previous health scares?
So as it was said, it's very difficult to know when an epidemic arrives. For that, we need important surveillance systems. And WHO, the CDC, the European CDC, at the national level, authorities, health authorities are doing all the time that. What has worked, what has not worked, how we can improve surveillance system or reaction to epidemics. And I would say that this started with SARS. SARS was one of the big epidemics of the new era. And from that time, we have really improved our system to react. Of course, it's not perfect. It's even far from being perfect.
Yeah, because we saw, for instance, in this country, we ordered way too much bird flu vaccine. We saw the World Health Organization overblow the numbers when it came to Ebola.
No, I agree, because it's not easy. I don't say that mistakes have not been done, but I think it's also difficult to do everything right.
Jonathan Ball, have big institutions like the WHO improved?
It's very difficult to say. Time will tell. Obviously, there were some criticisms about how WHO behaved in terms of the Ebola virus outbreak and how quickly it alerted the international community to the fact that the West African epidemic was getting out of control. Health systems are improving and have improved, but I think there is still a massive gulf between the developed countries and less developed developing countries. So, for example, we talk about SARS. If SARS had found its way into Africa rather than found its way across the Atlantic into Canada, we could be looking at a totally different picture in terms of SARS today. We could still have SARS outbreaks because the surveillance systems, the healthcare systems in places like sub-Saharan Africa, I don't think are still adequate and up to the job of really predicting and getting on top of and controlling these sorts of outbreaks. So,
and on that point, there's a lot of criticism
for the international community to do.
On that point, there's a lot of criticism, Jonathan Ball, that's leveled at rich countries, saying that if the epidemic doesn't hit a rich country, if, for instance, there hadn't been these warnings for Zika virus in the United States, we possibly wouldn't be talking about it right now.
Well, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. You're absolutely right, because we've had outbreaks since 1947. We've had outbreaks across the Pacific Islands over the last few years, and certainly it's never hit media attention. It's the fact that it's, in fairness, we've discovered or realised that it's potentially a more serious disease illness than we thought it was previously. So it's, that there is that to add to the equation, to add to the picture. But the Western world has to realise that the threats come from places that don't have good healthcare facilities and infrastructures, because that's where we're likely to get a lot of the viruses and infectious diseases that will threaten us in future. And so we've got away with things so far. We may not always get away with things. And I don't want to say that in a scaremongering way. I think it's a plea really for governments to invest in developing countries' infrastructure to make sure that they are fit for purpose.
And is it, I mean, you were mentioning there the SARS outbreak, but again, I can't help but think of what is the worst of these mosquito-borne diseases, malaria, which kills so many people across the globe every year. Again, if this was something in cold weather climates, would malaria have already been wiped out?
Well, we know, for example, that we did have malaria in places like the UK many years ago, so that we've been able to eradicate these things. We've done that through different means, through things like land drainage, etc., which has got rid of the habitat for mosquitoes. It's not an easy thing to do, to eradicate habitats for insects. Insects are very resilient, so we need to be more prepared for the threats that infectious diseases bring. And I think it has to be a real balanced approach. There has to be vaccines, there has to be treatments, but there also has to be really good public health measures and good education, and indeed vector control.
All right, good education can be a double-edged sword. We have one remark here on Twitter from Johnny. Zika is annoyingly similar to the Ebola terrifying the U.S. last year, with the addition of spreading via mosquitoes once it gets here. Cynthia, I get the feeling that viewers having a bit of dig at us journalists here. In the age of the 24-hour news cycle, scares get amplified.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. Just if you mentioned, we have Ebola. Every time we have a crisis, everybody, with the media, we have a party of guilty somewhat, because of course you go when you're going to spread the news, and after that, for some months or after weeks, we got tired of this, and then you move on to another disease. But on the other hand, of course, it's important to enlighten the population about this kind of dangers. And for one, like United States has issued this alarming issues, avoid trying to advise people not to go to this Brazil and other areas. It might be a blessing for Brazil, because like this we have the attention, and maybe it might help to struggle against the mosquitoes and the diseases in Brazil as well, and in other countries like Colombia and other neighbors.
And when you read the story, because a lot of people see this and they will be scared, and they may not come for Carnival, and they may not come for the Olympics, just like a lot of people will not have come to Paris on vacation after the last November's attacks. Is there the feeling that we live in an era where the whole world seems like a no-go zone?
Exactly, no-go zone. But I hopefully, I guess, for until the Olympics, I think not that people will forget about it, but it might be under more control. And that's also the hopes of the governments in Brazil, because the Olympic Games are going to happen in July. It's winter, so it's not that hot, so it's not an environment for mosquitoes. So government is counting on luck and on good weather.
Well, if you invite me, I'll come to Rio. There's
thank
no
you.
problem.
You should go.
On that score. Cynthia Cardoso, many thanks. I want to thank Yazdan Pana. I want to thank as well Dr. Judy Stone for joining us from Cumberland, Maryland, and from Nottingham in England, Jonathan Ball. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. So a lot of focus on the reactions coming out of Brazil, in particular reactions from the Health Minister, Marcelo Castro. And basically all of the local media have been quoting his declaration that 220,000 members of Brazil's armed forces are going to be going door to door to try to eradicate this mosquito that is spreading amongst other diseases.
Cynthia Cardoso
Zika
was dubious about it.
Right. Well, it's that declaration in any case, it's been getting out there, and also O Globo, for example, in Rio de Janeiro was reporting it. Also, the Sao Paulo-based press reporting that quote that we are badly losing the battle. So a lot of dramatic statements, images as well of what that will involve. These are Getty images. Photos showing the army going door to door, whether they are stock images or actual images. I believe they are images of the current attempt, at least, to curb the spread of it. Tweets as well, recounting that travel agencies around the world have been receiving letters from Rio promising that there would be no Zika threat during the Olympics. So really this seems to be motivated more by fears of the consequences for the Olympics than anything else. And the Wall Street Journal, in its headline headline there certainly seems to be linking this fight against the mosquitoes with the fight to quell Olympic Zika fears. You can see then, François, a lot of maps going up on social media. This is on Newsweek's Twitter feed. Also, The Economist showing the risk of this virus spreading across the Americas and even beyond. And of course, the worries for pregnant women. You can see the Jamaica Observer newspaper here, which, like many other countries in Latin America, Central America, even North America, is warning women against getting pregnant in the next 6 to 12 months. And even this is the Bangladesh English language daily, the Dhaka Tribune, also worried about that. And just to finish on I suppose, what this means for civilization. Bill McKibben, writing for The Guardian, says, think about this. Women should avoid the most essential and beautiful of human tasks, if we follow the advice of some of these countries, such as Jamaica. It is unthinkable. It is like something out of a science fiction story, the absolute core of a dystopian future. And he says, really, this is very worrying stuff indeed. If a civilization where you can't safely have a baby is barely a civilization. So he's saying really that there needs to be a big effort to combat what is a very dramatic consequence of global warming for him, in fact.
All right, many thanks for that, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.